This is episode 70 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico podcast. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. This and every week, we'll be talking to you about public policy issues facing New Mexico. Wally, especially this week with the legislature in full swing, and so many big news items coming at us from around the country, there is a lot to talk about, abundant topics for us here on Tipping Point, New Mexico.
There absolutely is, and let's just jump right to it. The first one, Paul, I'd love to hear your comments on is Amazon was going to New York, and then now they're not going to New York. And some people actually applauded that. It seems a little foreign to New Mexican applauding 25,000 jobs not coming to a community. But what are your thoughts on that, and what might it mean for New Mexico?
Boy, there is so much to talk about. Of course, New Mexico, our elected officials tried. They put a program in to get Amazon, theoretically to come here when there was all these proposals in Amazon. Please come to our state. Of course, Andrew Cuomo famously said that he would change, I believe, his last name or maybe his kid's name to Amazon if he could get Amazon.com to come to his state. And ultimately, surprising a lot of us free market advocates, they did, in fact, at least temporarily, pick New York City as one of their HQ2s. They split it up between New York and Northern Virginia. Now, Northern Virginia made a lot of sense. Virginia, very politically stable state, despite its kind of recent shift to the left. Some chaos now going on in their political leadership, but a lot of us were really scratching our heads when New York got the nod. Of course, New York City, it's a global city. It's a very important city, and there was that argument you could make for New York, but from a public policy perspective, really New York was always hostile. And that being said, of course, you have a lot of subsidies, a lot of grants, a lot of goodies being given to bring Amazon into New York, and we knew that was going to be expected. $3 billion was what was ultimately given to Amazon, in the sense that it was a lot of tax breaks and exemptions. Now, I downloaded an article because I really hadn't followed this too closely when Amazon made their initial announcement. 25,000 employees was the number that Amazon was going to hire there. So that's a big impact, even in a major city. $1.2 billion in tax credits for essentially construction, the land, etc. So that's 1.2 out of the $3 billion right there. $505 million in grants for the construction. Largely, again, more exemptions and deductions on expenses. And furthermore, 2 additional city tax breaks of nearly $1.3 billion. This is taken from a website called patch.com. You can go online and look for different websites that have parsed out what exactly Amazon was supposed to get out of the deal. Now, of course, they're leaving because Alexandria Ortiz, AOC, we'll just call her AOC.
AOC, she's initials.
She is too tough to wrap my Anglo tongue around in terms of her last name, all of her names. But anyway, what I got to thinking as I looked through this suite of subsidies and the whole debacle now at this point regarding Amazon.com and its decision to now pull out of New York City, is how much better of a deal New York was getting than New Mexico's getting with regard to the film subsidy program.
When we were doing the show prep, you brought that up. And, once you hear billions of dollars, the thought initially jumped to my mind, well, New Mexico can't give billions of dollars of support. But when you look at the ratio of what New York was getting relative to what they would receive if that package would have gone through and Amazon would have gotten there, it looks very favorable to some of the economic development packages that New Mexico has put in place over the years. And particularly if you take a look at your personal favorite, the film subsidy.
Right. Yeah. It is so important when you hear the terms corporate welfare and tax breaks and subsidies to go down a little bit into the details and figure out, is this something where the taxpayers' dollars are actually being spent directly on a business or corporation that's coming into your city or state? Or is this an exemption where Amazon could or should be paying taxes, but they're not? And a vast majority of this $3 billion is in the form of exemptions that Amazon could be paying taxes on. Well, New York has very high taxes. They would clearly not be competitive for a business like Amazon to come in and create all those jobs if they kept all those taxes in place. New Mexico's film subsidies are money collected from you and I, handed over to the film industry. And worse than that is, while Amazon was going to create these 25,000 new jobs, presuming that Amazon survives the next 5 to 10 years, I think it looks very good. Amazon's definitely got a business model that seems to work, but you never know. They would be there, and those people would be there paying taxes and bringing economic activity and tax dollars into the state and the city of New York. Whereas the film program, you have to do it every single year. You have to spend an additional $50 million out of our pockets because those film companies do not stick around. They make a movie, they make a TV show. Maybe they stick around for a few years based on that, but there's no big investments in terms of buildings and construction and training of employees. It's a very ephemeral approach with regard to film. It's just the nature of the industry.
No, totally a project-based business that can come to a place very quickly if their incentives are good. And as we've seen around the country, leave very quickly if a place's incentives go down or somebody gives them a better deal.
Yeah. So if all it took was for New Mexico to offer $3 billion in tax payments foregone by Amazon, then we should offer that deal in a heartbeat. But I suspect that Amazon's real reason for being there was, well, New York is the heart of power in this country, media and otherwise. It is a city with a lot of people to choose from in terms of employees. They can find whatever they need there, as can they in Northern Virginia, which I suspect that if any specific area is going to win, it's going to be Virginia and the DC area at large, which is going to see a massive influx of jobs and economic growth. Of course, the challenge with both New York and Washington, D.C. is something's going to have to give with regard to the infrastructure. The metro system is already, and we're going to talk a lot about rail later on in this podcast, but the roads of both New York and D.C. are overwhelmed, terrible congestion in both areas. And yes, the transit system in New York seems to be a little bit better than maintained than what's gone on in DC. But either way, that's one of the biggest challenges for both. And New Mexico could theoretically make the case that we've got the best infrastructure, but Amazon was clearly making their decisions based on non-economic factors with regard to New York. And I don't think it surprises any of us who look at New York and the political risk associated with that particular state and the city that it did not go well. So good for Amazon that they're kind of figuring this out at the outset before they've invested a lot of money.
Well, hopefully we can take some lessons from New Mexico, and it does open up the idea about could we get Amazon here? Probably a bit of a stretch for lots of reasons, but similar type of, if we're going to be in the incentive business, let's take a look at the ones that, even though they seem rich, have the best return on that tax dollar coming back to the state of New Mexico and our populace. So very interesting. Now, speaking of which, there's some counterpoint in the media today, or in the media this last week, about staying in New Mexico or going. What's the name of that rock and roll song? Should I Say or Should I Go?
You got it. Well, last week, I believe on this podcast, we talked a little bit about our friend Michael Aguilar and his article that appeared in the Journal last Sunday, essentially saying I'm young, ambitious, and in order to fulfill my professional goals, I need to leave the state of New Mexico. Then in a very rare, quite honestly, thing for the Albuquerque Journal or any newspaper, you might get one opinion piece, maybe a letter to the editor saying so-and-so said this or that I disagree with, whatever. But Michael's piece received 3 full-length op-eds in this Sunday's paper from 3 different people, essentially saying for various reasons they are coming to New Mexico or they are staying in New Mexico as young people to live and work. And first and foremost, Wally, you and I both fall into the small L libertarian camp. Do whatever you want, folks. You should exercise your ability as an American to go wherever you feel is best for you, to find a job, find fulfillment in your life, and to make the life that you want to make. But what we are talking about is real people in the real world, driven by a combination of culture, personal preferences, and of course, public policy, which of course is our strong suit here at the Rio Grande Foundation. Wally?
Well, my thoughts on this is I completely agree with you. Here's my take is, you don't get what you want, you get what you incentivize and what the conditions are. And I think a lot of people take these articles about people leaving as they're somehow hate New Mexico or have this disloyalty. And what they're doing is they're pointing out incentives that they have to leave, basically that the grass is greener elsewhere. Doesn't mean you have to be a hater to leave. And I think it's a good idea from a personal point of view. If you do something, you go for positive reasons. But I also read an article recently that it's a study that said 54% of Californians would consider leaving the state because they have a high cost of living. And it's hard to argue that there's a more beautiful, wonderful place on many levels than California, not only in the United States, but in the whole world. But you have enough bad policies and certain prices and things get out of whack, all but the most very affluent can be enticed to say, man, there's got to be somewhere better than this. And the same thing in New Mexico. There's much to love about New Mexico. We're never saying there isn't, but there's some policy things that make business in particular difficult here and make the opportunities not as great as they may be other places.
No doubt. And it's kind of surprising to me that only 54% of Californians are considering leaving. I mean, it is a beautiful place and the beaches and the mountains, et cetera, but there's also a lot of expenses and a lot of bad politics and policies. But so we always like to focus on data, the economic freedom of the 50 states. It's a report by the Fraser Institute released in 2018. Where can you keep more of your money? Where can you work without getting permission slips or having your job dictated by the government in some way, shape, or form? Those kinds of things. Where can you work where you don't have a requirement by the state that you have to work for at least X number of dollars an hour? Because I know, as surprising as it is to some people, not everybody's labor is worth $15 an hour. It might be worth $12 an hour. So Texas is the 3rd most economically free, according to Fraser Institute. Colorado is 8th, Oklahoma 9th, Arizona 10th. Utah is all the way down at 20th, and New Mexico is 42nd. So you see New Mexico sticking out very significantly in the area of economic freedom. And I think that's really the critical factor here, is that you see more economic freedom, especially in Texas, but all across the region and in our neighboring states. So if you're looking for a job and you're in New Mexico, you can go, a several hour drive perhaps, but within a short flight or something from your family and friends here in New Mexico, and go find a much better job in the field that you want to pursue. And that's exactly what young Mr. Aguilar did. Now, education. Now, this gets more important for the 20s and 30s set, especially those who have children. But education, Texas. So it's first worth looking at this from the reality of the too many education indices focus on inputs, not outputs, and they also don't account for poverty and all the other things that can hold back certain groups of people. But
and another way of saying that is they judge, one way to judge it is where the state ends up educationally. But if the state already started at a very good place,
Exactly.
that may not be a good indication compared to states that start off with bigger challenges and the folks that are coming into their school system, how much progress they make with them, why they have them in their 12-year
right.
system.
So after you account for all of New Mexico's challenges and other states' challenges, Texas, 5th best education quality in the country, Colorado 14th, Arizona 20th, Utah 38th, which is a little surprising, but shows you that they do have strong demographics in the state of Utah that allow them to succeed even despite very low spending on education. Oklahoma 40th, New Mexico 41st. Well, you might say, gee, New Mexico's kind of competitive there. But again, we're accounting for all the challenges that we historically have seen in New Mexico, and New Mexico still remains at the bottom in education quality. If we just did some things like school choice and increasing accountability for the education system, reducing the red tape for teachers and the system, we would have a much higher performing system than we have in New Mexico. So those are two of the big data points. We could go into the economic freedom, the personal income level, all those things ad nauseum. But even we have limited time on a podcast. The upshot is, what is actually happening? And we talk about young people. Well, the first group to go after is 18 to 24-year-olds. We looked at, there's a website, go to arrowsofenchantment.com. You can find this University of North Carolina Demography Center. They looked at 2010 to 2015, which I realize 6 years is a relatively short period, but you got to start somewhere, and this data was readily available. So 18 to 24-year-olds, New Mexico actually saw slight growth. So these are young people just getting out of high school or even in college. We saw 0.6% growth. But in Arizona, we saw 6.2% growth. So several multiples more growth among the 18 to 24 set in Arizona than in New Mexico. Utah, 7% growth. Colorado, 8.9% growth. Texas, 7.7% growth. And even Oklahoma, which you think, well, 18 to 24-year-olds, do I really want to be in Oklahoma? I mean, let's face it, it doesn't have the same attraction as a state like New Mexico does. But even they have 2.2% growth, which is 3+ times, almost 4 times what we have in the 18 to 24-year-old set.
Well, and the thing that is very striking to me is that 18 to 24 set in particular, the ones that you just got through spending all the money in public school to get them through K through 12. And in New Mexico, we've just spent a lot of money on you, likely if you went to college in our higher education system. And then those that are doing well, if they're leaving, that is really not a good thing to have happen. Systemic, that's a huge problem.
Yeah, so those 18 to 24-year-olds, and it's worth noting that we do outperform, states like West Virginia, states like Michigan, some of these Midwestern and Northeastern states that are slow growing by nature, cold weather, old style economies. So New Mexico does have the advantage of location. It's just when you compare us versus any of our neighbors, we lose big time. Now, the next demographic area, and we're really going to kind of leave it with some of these, we're going to touch on the retirees, which is an important area as well, shows you what is happening to New Mexico. But 25 to 54-year-olds, now from a demography perspective, this is kind of the prime tax-paying years, the years when if you're a state, you kind of lick your chops and say, oh, those are the people that are starting to make real money. Yes, they have kids often, but those are the people paying your taxes if you're a state. Well, in New Mexico, we saw a negative 3.3% growth, or negative 3.3%.
Yeah.
So we saw a decline
Contraction
during that the time period, 2010 to 2015. Arizona saw modest 3.1% growth in 25 to 54-year-olds. Utah, 6.1% growth. Colorado, 4.7%. Now, we beat out Oklahoma just barely. They're actually, no, they're at 0.5% growth. So Oklahoma did grow slightly, and then Texas at 6.7%. So these are the people, they're not moving for the wow factor. Maybe if you're 26, 27, these are people who, if they're moving, it's job, family, we want to settle down in a given place. When you're 25 to 54-year-olds, unless you're single, you're not in a relationship or anything, you are moving to the places you want to kind of be for an extended period of time. And these are the people that are paying a lot of taxes and often having kids that are going through the school. So New Mexico is losing that very big demographic area.
Yeah, that's a fascinating statistic. And as a result, our politicians are doing a lot of policy work on things like this, Paul. For example, the city council in Albuquerque, what are they working on with regard to people leaving our city and our state? Plastic ban.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe those two don't. But it's one of those, do you get the feeling that here in New Mexico, we are worried about the wrong things much of the time from a policy point of view? And this is just a good example. We have some demographic problems. The city has a lot of problems, crime and otherwise, and this is what we're working on. Interesting.
You got it. And real quickly,
yes.
The final group is 65 plus.
Yes.
We did see, that is the area where of all of these demographic groups, New Mexico is seeing the most gains. 21.4% gain among the 65 plus. Now, Arizona, 27% growth, Utah 23.4% growth, Colorado 29.5%, even Texas 23.9%. You don't think, gee, I hit 65, I'm going to retire to Amarillo, but apparently enough people do see that as attractive to move there. Oklahoma, the only one that's a limited number of folks of that 65 plus demographic, only 13.7% growth. So it is the one area that New Mexico is competitive in, but it does not bode well for the future economically or socially, quite frankly, of our state when the only real significant gains in population are being made in that 65 plus set.
Well, and as we've seen in Japan, there are great problems when a population for a country, or in our case, a state, gets to be very, very old. That creates a lot of difficulties for governance, for funding of the public sector, for economies in general. And yeah, that is not a good sign. Now, having said that, people coming back to New Mexico with pensions, this is an anecdote, not a hard study, but I've talked to more people who said, well, how did you get to Albuquerque to retire? Well, I was here at Kirtland, or I did a class at Sandia or Los Alamos. I really liked it. I decided I wanted to retire here. There's much to offer, but we need, that's not the economic base. That seems like the economic condiment at the top of the cheeseburger. We need some things a little bit lower in that cheeseburger pyramid, if it were. So that's a wonderful mixed metaphor.
Is it a green chili cheeseburger?
It is. It's
All
on
right.
the green chili cheeseburger trail. So
There we go.
And now that green chili cheeseburger, what is it wrapped in? Well, according to the City Council of Albuquerque, it may not be in a plastic container for too long. And that straw that you poke into the cup may not be a plastic. We have a plastics, I don't know if ban is the right word. It's a definite struggle to be able to use that. A lot of rules and a lot of government interventions being proposed at the City Albuquerque City Council.
You got it. And the vote is expected to happen on Wednesday. That is the 20th of February here. So coming very soon. I believe they would normally have met on Monday, but because of the President's Day holiday, the City Council meeting is this Wednesday, 5 o'clock downtown. If people can show up and oppose it, if people can email or contact their city councilors and let them know that they do not support a plastic bag ban, all for the better. I will be there, Paul Gessing of the Rio Grande Foundation, arguing against a ban on plastics. And yeah, maybe it's not a full ban. Yes, if you're disabled, you can get a straw. But when you're talking about that cheeseburger meal, if you're putting it in one of those clamshell plastic containers, those are going to be eliminated entirely. If you have the straw with your drink, you're going to have to argue with the people at the fast food place to make sure that they are willing to give you that straw. And then, heaven forbid, they put your cheeseburger in a plastic bag, because that'll also be eliminated. Now, I put a blog posting out on our errorsoфenchantment.com website.
One of my favorite recent posts.
Oh, thank you.
There. Yeah, very personal, but very to the point.
Well, with 2 dogs in the house, you get the impression that we might use some plastic bags for a specific reason, and we would be encouraged to do so. At least I believe it's the Water Authority that has the "There is no poop fairy" advertising campaign going on, which I think we're sending folks a double message. But it's not the first time that government has said out of one side of its mouth, do X, and then out the other side of their mouth, they're saying don't do X with regard to any public policy. But this one, especially the collecting of dog waste as you walk your dog. And of course, we have the...
And so what are the bags that the city provides in this case?
Plastic bags.
You guessed it, plastic.
Yes, so we have trash can liners, of course, around the guesting house. A lot of different things that we want to put in those bags and the little trash cans. And then when I do walk the aforementioned dogs, I'm always on the lookout for things like aluminum cans especially. And my 3 daughters, they get to collect the money associated with those aluminum cans when I do recycle them and take them to the recycling center. And I use, of course, plastic bags for the very purpose. Even just thinking about paper bags are so much bulkier. You can't really get your, I hate to say it, but to pick up a piece of dog excrement, you need something that really wraps around your hand, kind of like a plastic bag would do, whereas paper bag is very bulky. It's not really something you can stick in your back pocket very easily. Sticking multiple bags for multiple dogs and or the aluminum cans you might encounter on your pickup, to your walk to pick up and clean up your neighborhood, that gets very difficult. And not to mention that studies have shown repeatedly that paper bags are more water intensive and more overall environmentally intensive and less reusable than those wonderful plastic bags that we get from the grocery store. So it's not really a core economic issue in the sense that this is something that is a tax inherently or a policy that, like a minimum wage, is going to affect broadly the whole economy at some big level. It's just silly government regulations that are going to have negative impacts on people's day-to-day lives, but in a much more intimate way, I think, than a lot of other bad government policies.
So what's the saying, when plastic bags are outlawed, only outlaws will have plastic bags? And I think I might have shared before on this topic a few shows back. Santa Fe has a similar ordinance on the books. And when I worked in Santa Fe, there's quite a pipeline of people who live in Albuquerque, work in Santa Fe. They would ask us to bring our plastic bags up to them because they had uses for them as well, and they couldn't get them in Santa Fe. So, it's very interesting. We will see how that goes. We'll see what the public thinks about that. But again, like you say, this podcast scheduled to come out on the 19th, and that'll be the 20th. We'll see what happens there. So.
Yeah, well, grocery stores in Rio Rancho will probably see some uptick in business from people who go across the city lines, not just Rio Rancho, but perhaps other areas of our community that'll see an uptick if Albuquerque City Council does go along with this silly overreach. But speaking of overreach, APS overreached on the election. We kind of have beat this to a dead horse, but the fact is that the APS folks just don't seem willing to learn the lessons they need to learn. So they decided, hey, the powers that be at APS said, we're going to put a freeze on most maintenance of our facilities, which is exactly the wrong lesson that they were supposed to learn. They need to maintain their existing facilities at a higher level, not necessarily go out building the latest and greatest new facility and I drove by that Louisiana and Comanche teacher training center. The parking lot alone is just massive. I can't imagine they're getting LEED, that LEED certification is going on there, but perhaps it is. It's just a very significant footprint, a very big building. But their budget has $321.7 million this year for capital expenditures, and they're telling us that they can't maintain their buildings and do the things that are necessary to keep those facilities functioning. Strikes me as this is a whole load of dog poop.
Well, this reminds me of what used to happen in Washington back when we actually did budgets as opposed to continuing resolutions like we seem like we do now. But every time they would talk about slightly reducing the Park Service budget, the Park Service would always say, well, we're going to have to close down the Statue of Liberty. That's our plan, not to close down a monument that's out in the middle of nowhere that 20 or 50 people see a day. Let's cut back on the one that the most people do. And it just struck me that that's where kind of APS is. They're in a little bit of a position where they're making some really unreasonable arguments. And it would seem like it's not going to serve them well getting back in the good graces with the taxpayers if they indeed want that to continue on with that course of action.
Yeah, and I posted a story that I did, my interview with KOAT Channel 7 on this particular topic. It's, again, available at arrowsoфenchantment.com. Wally, we have limited time available and a few hills to climb here. I was in Santa Fe last week a few times testifying on, oh, by the way, a bill that would have eliminated our Davis-Bacon wage rate at the state of New Mexico for public works projects. Yeah.
They let that come up on the agenda? Is that in the House or the Senate?
The House committee held a hearing, and I testified there as the expert witness alongside Representative Larry Scott of Hobbs. And of course, the bill died a very quick and painful death. And APS did not send any of its people up to argue, hey, maybe we should be exempted from Davis-Bacon prevailing wage because we can save, as Ohio found, nearly 11% of our construction costs and maintenance costs on our buildings. A right to work bill was introduced, also killed in the same labor committee, also Representative Scott. And there was a bill, HB 85. That's the one to eliminate or ban the counties that have adopted right to work. There's 10 counties in New Mexico that are right to work. HB 85 is introduced by Damon Eli, very, very leftist, bad individual on many, many different policies. And the minimum wage, HB 31, passed the floor of the House, as did HJR 1, which would tap the permanent fund for pre-K. So the House has been just living up to everything that we expected of them. Bad policies. $12 minimum wage is what they're looking at. A temporary, very limited exemption for wait staff. Right now, though, the good news, the silver lining to this big black cloud is that the Senate, with a little more than half of the session gone, does not seem to be rushing to do the bidding of the House of Representatives. They seem to be moving much more slowly, much more deliberatively, and maybe skeptically with regard to the crazy train coming out of the House of Representatives.
Well, and you see this when there's a legislative body in the opposite party than the governor. It's pretty low risk and symbolic to be able to pass things if you know that the executive is going to veto them. When all three branches of government in New Mexico and both houses of the legislature, when the governorship particularly, are in the same party, I think you need to be careful. We've had hydraulic fracturing bans proposed. Again, I think it would be tough to overstate how bad that could be for New Mexico immediately if that were to happen in terms of damaging our industry that we rely on as a state so much for jobs and tax revenues. So it is very interesting. A lot of bad policies flew through the House, and you are right. There are many in the business and limited government communities that have their fingers crossed and potentially lighting those votive candles that you can buy at Walgreens, that the Senate will be more rational and slow some of these bad policies down.
Well, folks, all I can say on that is it's not the time to just light a candle and cross your fingers. Get on the horn, get your emails going, get up to Santa Fe and talk to your state senators and make sure that they know that just because the House is doing something and the governor is encouraging such bad behavior, like she's got a bunch of teenagers there in the House and they are having a big keg party, and Michelle is going out and buying the alcohol and probably some roofies and other nefarious products as well. The Senate needs to be the adult in the room and put the kibosh on so much of what the House of Representatives is doing.
Yeah, and then, a lot of people just do not realize if there is a strength in New Mexico legislature, and I believe there is one, it's the accessibility. So you can go to nmlegis.gov and look up, find your legislator. A phone number will be there if you wish to call their office and leave your name and what your opinion is on any piece of legislation. They will take that. There's generally an email address posted as well. So a thoughtful citizen can have an impact here in New Mexico. But as you said, you do need to take action on these things. If they don't hear anything but one side of the issue, it's tough to get balance. And a lot of these policies, they certainly have their political professional advocates pushing them hard up there.
Oh, yeah. Well, we've got one kind of omnibus final subject, which involves mass transit. The Rio Grande Foundation does not inherently oppose all mass transit. We just don't support transportation investments and projects that really don't do much to carry people from place to place and that spend way too darn much money. So national news, California's high-speed rail system, the not exactly conservative Gavin Newsom, the new governor of California, put the kibosh on the system that's going to go, or was supposed to go, from LA up to the Bay Area. Now, those are two fast-growing, highly populated, very expensive corridors, or that is an expensive corridor to build between those two cities. But you could argue, hey, that's a spot that would make sense for high-speed rail. Well,
not a whole lot different than New York to Boston, for
Right.
example. There's a lot of positives with regard to putting rail there that wouldn't exist in a place like New Mexico.
But even with President Obama, former President Obama, throwing stimulus dollars at California and all the money that came in for that project, it was still way too expensive. So California, in their infinite wisdom, decided, let's try to do the cheap option. Go with Barstow to Modesto. And those two struggling, not so highly populated, with plenty of farmland in between areas. They are supposed to complete that track of the high-speed rail system between those two communities. Some conservative news sites said that the whole project was put on hold. No, just the project that anyone would actually ride, with all due respect to the communities of Barstow and Modesto. It's just an absolutely huge waste of money at this point. And unfortunately, those are our tax dollars, federal tax dollars, being spent on that incredibly wasteful project. Also, the Rail Runner, something I was not even aware of. I thought I knew every in and out of that infinite boondoggle, but Larry Barker, investigative reporter at Channel 13 KRQE, did an excellent report finding that $800,000 was spent more than a decade ago of our taxpayer dollars, not really federal dollars in this case, on a Lobo platform for the Rail Runner train that's not even used and hasn't been used for practically a decade since it was put there. One of the problems, there's so many, but as a occasional user of that train, one of the biggest problems with using it is the absurd number of stops for one or two people to get on and off of. The Lobo station's one of them, although of course it's not really used, but the Zia Road and Santa Fe and numerous others, the Rail Runner is just not user friendly, as if the expense of the project itself was worthwhile by itself. And
Well, and then one of the things that make these additional stations doubly problematic, one, if they're not needed and it's wasteful of money. Two, if they get put into place, one of the biggest criticisms and structural defects of the Rail Runner is that it stops so many times. It just, your elapsed time to get from Albuquerque to Santa Fe, which is accounts for the preponderance of the traffic.
Right.
It's slowed down and makes people not want to ride the train.
You got it. Yeah. It's something that you would think they would address. But of course, these projects are political in nature, not geared towards transportation needs. And the same can be said for Amtrak. They shook loose another $50 million, this time from Congress in the latest budget deal that, of course, was most notable for the shutdown and the wall issue. But $50 million to make sure that the Albuquerque or the route through New Mexico to Albuquerque, kind of the Lamy and up to Raton track that is not really maintained for any purpose except for Amtrak. They're once a day each way trains that go on that track had fallen into disrepair, and basically the Amtrak system was saying we can't run on these tracks unless there's new money to maintain them. Governor Martinez wisely had said, jump in a lake. Of course, now the federal government and our brilliant delegation of Udall and Heinrich came through with $50 million of pork to maintain those particular rails so that, God forbid, the Southwest Chief route there is not replaced by a bus. The numerous dozens, maybe 10 or 15 people who rely on that train on occasion will thankfully be able to take the train now. So $50 million of your federal tax dollars. And then a very timely article and timely discussion, given what happened in California, is the idiotic, and there's no other way to say it, the Green New Deal. It was as if Gavin Newsom in California just said, here, we're going to once and for all put out the concept that this high-speed rail system that the Green New Deal they want to put through is just not viable. So we're going to take this time to shut down the LA to San Francisco high-speed routes. So that Green New Deal hopefully never sees the light of day, but what a complete waste of money. The whole idea is that they want, because supposedly high-speed rail is greener than flying on a plane, they want to build a bunch of high-speed rail tracks from all major cities and essentially make plane travel unnecessary was their mentality.
Well, Randall O'Toole, who is an expert on trains, both from a historical and a policy point of view, in his book, talked about when train systems were being run by the private sector, they realized very early on that they couldn't carry passengers to dispersed locations very effectively. And so what did they do? Started bus companies. Now, we seem like we've forgotten that lesson in the era of deficit spending in Washington, and where $1 trillion spends like $1 billion used to in earlier periods of time. But there's just very little that would indicate that a massive rail system like this could ever do anything other than potentially bankrupt a country, as Japan's foray into dramatic expansion of their high rail system did. It almost killed the Japanese economy. And I think that's the sort of thing, if this Green New Deal, God forbid, ever gets traction, look out, because it could be a very long and expensive time for our country until we realize that, hey, maybe that isn't going to work.
Unfortunately, I don't think it'll ever happen, but yes, I would love to assign our congressional delegations from other states, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, yes, I got the name right that time, AOC, and numerous other politicians at the state and local level. Just read Romance of the Rails by Randall O'Toole. You may not be convinced, but Randall O'Toole really lays out a very concise and clear argument explaining why these mass transit systems, especially the modern ones, just do not work as well as other means of transportation, and they spend way too much money for very little in the way of gains. And finally capping off this little mass transit section of our program, the ART program, the ART bus along Central, got some national attention. I'm sure it was not exactly desired on their part, but the LA Times carried a story in which the gory details and sadness of that ART bus system were kind of laid bare for the readers of the LA Times. I'm not sure what caused this to happen at this particular moment, because we're now in a holding pattern for, I guess, a year and a handful of months until the new buses come in and whatnot, and we'll eventually have a bus system running down Central, theoretically. But kind of interesting that the LA Times took this opportunity to show Albuquerque in yet another bad light.
Well, and it is interesting. The article I thought was well done. I think it, sometimes you have outsiders come in and report a story and they don't get the gist of it. I don't think that was the case here. My thought was, I had the same thought. Why would the LA Times run this? And maybe they were looking at their train project and say, where else around the country is having horrendous problems with not well thought out mass transit projects? And lo and behold, a Google search would certainly bring up Albuquerque Rapid Transit to the top of that list.
Well, I did take a careful look at the LA Times piece, and the author was one Gustavo Arellano. I may not be pronouncing that name right either, but he used to write a column for the Alibi called Ask a Mexican, and he would frequently answer questions, whether from Anglos or assimilated New Mexicans or Hispanics in the country, on a variety of topics of Hispanic culture and whatnot. So he's somebody that I presume is more familiar than the average LA Times writer with Albuquerque and kind of the issues that we have here. So I'm sure he may have been in town recently and thought, hey, I'll put this piece forth for the LA Times. Well, Wally, we have probably given more than enough content for this week here on Tipping Point, New Mexico. Thanks for listening to this week's discussion and topics, conversation. We're working every day to turn New Mexico around. Go to RioGrandeFoundation.org for more information to support our work.